Connectra creates opportunities for people living with disabilities by providing information, resources, and programming geared towards greater inclusion and quality of life. Check out some of the programs we offer through our online learning platform, Connect Together, including our Service Mondays, where we highlight a local organization or initiative. Wednesday Chair Yoga with Bobbie Seale-Cobiskey. Thursday Adapted Fitness with Megan Williamson. Friday Rotating Dance Classes hosted by Janice Lawrence and Joanne Cuff. And other initiatives, including presentations by the Disabled Independent Gardeners Association's GrowABLE program and our Perspective series. Check out our updated programs calendar on our website, connectra.org, or find us on Facebook at Connectra Society.
Okay, you guys can start.
I was on mute. Okay, take two. So, welcome to this overview of Creating Accessible Neighborhoods workshops. I am Heather McCain. I am the founder and executive director of Creating Accessible Neighborhoods. I am a white non-binary person who has freckles, wears silver glasses, and has a shaved head. The photo behind me is of the Kettle Valley Railway train and surrounding area. This slide has a logo of my organization, and the logo is orange, shows 4 heads, 2 at the top, 1 nestled between, 1 underneath those 3, all arms outstretched encircling one another. And it includes the website and email for CAN, which is www.canbc.org and info@canbc.org. I will be describing any images on slides to ensure that blind and partially sighted people have access to visual information. If I don't describe an image, it is a plain slide with a white and orange or black color scheme. We are told that we have consent over our bodies, but then we are told in small and large ways that we have to control our bodies, minds, and senses and only meet our needs when given permission or at specific times. In this workshop, you have autonomy over yourselves. I trust that you will do what you need for yourself. Your participation and your needs may be different to those of others, and that is okay. We value your participation however that looks. So thank you for being in this space with us today. Welcome to the Safer and Braver Space. Creating Accessible Neighborhoods is committed to creating safer spaces for people from marginalized identities. We also recognize the importance of creating safer spaces for those who are curious and interested to learn more about people with marginalized identities. We appreciate that it can be scary to step into a space if you have little or no experience. So I want to start today by thanking you for taking that step. I ask you to be brave and open. Please know that I am here to help. In this space, we let people participate from their level, and you can ask questions at the end of the presentation. If you don't feel comfortable asking in front of the group, you can private message me your question. This slide has a fast forward symbol. This image will be used on all content warning slides. Part of consent is ensuring people are able to make decisions for themselves based on advance warning about anything they may want to skip because it is triggering or traumatic for them. As such, content warnings are used within this presentation. I will mention the type of content viewers are being warned about and the length of the presentation they may want to skip. Additionally, there is a blanket content warning of ableism being discussed, and the following 4 minutes will deal with colonialism and has mention of genocide. This slide has a photograph of sunlight filtering through the trees at Seymour Provincial Park. I am coming to you today from the stolen territories of the Squamish people in what is colonially known as North Vancouver. This acknowledgement is a tiny piece in the larger context of the ongoing work that is necessary to challenge the legacies of colonialism and create disruptive change and true reconciliation. Content warning, mention of suicide and genocide. The slide is 1 minute and 45 seconds. This acknowledgement is a stepping stone to honor the healing that is necessary in the work to break down systemic and institutional barriers, including our inherent ableism. 30 to 35% of Indigenous people in Canada self-identify as being disabled. Many Indigenous people with disabilities have those disabilities because of the collective trauma and oppression, including cultural disruption that is a part of colonialism. The genocide that Canada continues to commit has major mental health consequences for Indigenous people. For the Indigenous population, major depression and suicide rates are both twice the national average. Many have no connection to their land or food sources. Their knowledge transfer is broken or attempted to be broken through forced assimilation. On this slide is a photograph of a totem pole with blue sky behind it and a border of wavy lines. Indigenous people have experienced intergenerational trauma, and the government continues to actively restrict, silence, and threaten them. Disability awareness must be part of moving away from our colonial practices. We need to question what privileges we have because of colonialism and what we can do beyond the land acknowledgement. Creating Accessible Neighbourhoods, or CAN, was initially created as a grassroots organization in Maple Ridge and Pitt Meadows, following my personal experiences with ableism and inaccessibility. I used a power wheelchair at the time. I'm shown on the slide in my wheelchair at a bus stop next to a bus. Bus drivers would lie repeatedly and tell me that the ramps were not operating because they didn't want to take time to deploy the ramps, thus acting as a gatekeeper and denying me access. I wrote letter after letter to TransLink with no response. I was unable to find an organization to support me. So in 2005, I founded CAN. I wrote the exact same letter to TransLink, this time with executive director under my name, and received a response a week later. We were able to resolve the issue. I have since worked with TransLink on many projects. News of our success spread, and CAN was soon flooded by disabled people with other access issues. CAN's reach increased as our work became more well-known throughout Metro Vancouver, then throughout the province, and now Turtle Island, also known as North America. We are sought out as consultants by government, businesses, communities, and nonprofits for projects that cover a broad range of topics, including accessibility, transportation, disability awareness, advocacy, poverty, 2S LGBTQIA+ issues, and more. This slide has a photograph of a group of people standing on a street corner. This was an accessibility tour for the Governor General's Canadian Leadership Conference to demonstrate the difficulties of navigating streetscapes in downtown Vancouver. In the first few years, CAN contacted individual businesses on behalf of members to educate about accessibility. We realized that there was a growing interest for accessibility audits, so we educated ourselves about best standards in Canada and throughout the world. We developed our own audit tool. For the first few years, we started with individual businesses. For example, we were hired by the Arbutus Club in Vancouver to do an accessibility audit of their facility. We gave recommendations and created a frontline staff accessibility guide that included information about the accessibility of the facility and tips for how to improve attitudinal accessibility, which is customer service. In the lead up to the 2010 Olympics and Paralympics, CAN was very busy and hired for many projects. This included working for 2010 Legacies Now to do on-site inspections of businesses. We were also hired by YVR, Vancouver's airport, specifically for parking, including drop-off zones and entrances and exits. And we were hired by the Vancouver Organizing Committee to assess accessibility of venues for the Olympics and Paralympics. CAN has been involved in the City of Burnaby neighborhood audits for several years. Burnaby has been utilizing the SWAN tool. SWAN stands for the Stakeholders Walkability Wheelability Audit in Neighborhoods. This tool was created by students and professors at the University of British Columbia and Simon Fraser University. CAN acts as a consultant for several projects at both universities, this tool being one of them. CAN started because of an issue with TransLink. Our relationship has continued over the years, including being hired to perform audits. The audits have been on a variety of features, including bus loops, bus stops, and routes to and from the bus stops. We've also audited the accessibility of Coast Mountain Bus Company, and we audited the accessibility of the Evergreen line prior to its opening. Most recently, CAN has done accessibility audits for the Polygon Gallery in North Vancouver and the Bill Reid Gallery in Vancouver. We also provided workshops for staff. CAN's direction has been shaped by need. As we gained members, visited more communities, and spoke with more advocates, we realized that there was a need for our work. From a grassroots organization that started from a single issue, we have grown into an organization that does so many diverse projects. This slide has an illustration of a diverse group of people, including several people with disabilities. As we grew, we saw that there was a gap in representing disabled people with multiple intersecting identities and how that affects access, equity, and participation. We heard from members that they could be part of themselves in certain spaces, such as queer and queer spaces or disabled and disability spaces, but never felt like they could bring their entire being comfortably into most spaces. We recognize that the majority of our members live with intersecting identities which are not properly acknowledged. These identities include income level, gender, sexuality, race, age, among others. CAN also recognizes that geographical location impacts one's ability to access services and support and truly be oneself. CAN began to work to educate about and model how to create spaces where people can be themselves fully. CAN aims to build and celebrate community. In 2019, CAN did a year-long board diversity project. This project was born out of frustration of organizations that say they represent certain identities or demographics, but have nobody of that population in positions of power, leadership, or decision-making. This slide has an image of a boardroom surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass windows and a group of people at the table. We wanted to work towards pairing diverse people with boards. Our original goal was to create a database of qualified candidates to match with boards. We spent the year talking to a variety of people, including those who had decades of board experience, those currently on boards, those new to boards, those considering joining boards, and those who didn't see themselves as board material. We also talked to staff who interact with their organization's boards. By the end of the year, we realized that no matter how qualified and suitable our candidates were, until the environments of boards changed, there would be a continuation of tokenism, exclusion, and lack of true participation. So we decided to pivot to education. We recognize that boards need education about gender and sexuality and disability, among other identities. We also recognize that many people with marginalized identities felt like imposters in leadership roles and positions of power. And this is the direct result of systems of power, even though it feels like it's an individual issue. Until there is a better understanding and knowledge about those pushed to the margins, board environments will continue to be problematic. So we created a series of workshops, including disability awareness, disability justice, gender and sexuality, and imposter syndrome. This slide has an image of a diverse group of disabled people of different heights, ages, body sizes, races, and other demographics. Our first workshop was disability awareness. We've been doing disability awareness workshops from the very beginning. We have populated our workshop with lived experience. 1 in 5 people of the world's population, 20% self-identify as having some form of disability. In Canada, 25% of non-Indigenous people have a disability, while 30 to 35% of Indigenous identify as disabled. This represents the world's largest minority. People with disabilities are also the 3rd largest economic power behind China and the United States. It is important to keep in mind that the statistics from the previous slide are people who are currently diagnosed and self-identify, and not a true reflection of how many people actually live with a disability. Here are some examples of how the system works against certain populations. Indigenous people do not have equitable access to health services due to a variety of factors, including geography, discrimination, lack of compassionate or respectful care, and culturally unsafe care. Autism research was male-centric, leaving many women and gender non-conforming people undiagnosed as their characteristics are different. This has led to autistic people using phrases like autism is not a boys' club to get across the need to focus on all genders. Black people are less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD, and when diagnosed, less likely to receive treatment or accommodation. It is vital that there is more awareness and education about disabled people. We are not a small portion of your community. Our workshop covers what disability is, how ableism shows itself, and how to fight it, including internalized ableism that disabled people often weaponize against themselves. Often people don't truly understand the words that we use. For example, there's still a lot of work to be done to help people better understand what disability encompasses. As such, myself, Corin Parsons, and Ingrid Palmer created the following definitions. Disability has multiple definitions. Disability is an umbrella term for a condition that affects a person's senses, brain, and/or body, and which restricts their ability to go about their daily life. Disability is a legal category that grants disabled individuals to certain accommodations and protections. Disability is a category of social difference maintained through systemic marginalization, including ableism and intersecting oppressions. And disability is an identity, a source of pride, and a foundation for a community that is connected through shared histories, geographies, and cultures that may additionally or alternatively include identities such as Crip, chronically ill, capital D deaf, lowercase d deaf, neurodivergent, MAD, and many more. Crip and MAD are two terms that disabled people are reclaiming, much as the 2S LGBTQIA+ community has done with the term queer. Please keep in mind that if you are not disabled, you should not use Crip and MAD. Every person has access needs. Society is set up to meet the needs of some, but it is leaving others behind. In some situations, people don't even recognize their access needs as needs. A good example are people who require glasses or contacts. This slide has a photo of brown and black eyeglasses. These people have a disability because without their glasses or contacts, they would face barriers going about their daily activities. However, most people with glasses or contacts don't consider themselves disabled, and this is because for the most part, their disability is socially recognized and understood, as is their need for assistive equipment such as contacts or glasses. We need to get to this stage of acceptance with other types of disabilities and adaptive equipment. Another example is an experience our organization had with a member who is partially sighted. We helped her get a magnifier for her computer screen at work. A year later, she changed jobs and her new employer was going to give her an updated screen reader. Magnifier. And she left her old one at her previous employment. And her previous boss figured that he would just throw it out. However, he didn't get to it for a week and noticed that fights were breaking out among her previous coworkers because they all wanted to use the magnifier. Eventually, the boss had to set up a schedule. One employee was always forgetting her reading glasses and liked the magnifier. Another employer was getting less headaches using it, and the third employee was getting less eye strain. Each person would not have identified as having an access need, and yet something that made life easier for a disabled person also made life easier for them. Image descriptions are meant for people who are blind and partially sighted. However, our organization has been contacted by people who take our workshops while walking, while at home juggling duties, and while doing other work. They say that they love the image descriptions because they don't miss information if they aren't looking at the screen. Anyone in this room who has a child or has helped someone with a child knows how important curb cuts, ramps, automatic doors are to those who push a stroller. This slide shows a family with 2 adults, a toddler being carried, and a stroller taking a walk on a seawall. We all benefit from accessibility being built into society. This slide shows a field of yellow flowers with 1 red poppy. Society has a sameness problem. We have created boxes and expect people to fit them. When they don't, those people are isolated and excluded and made to feel unwanted. Throughout our lives, we hear and see messages that continually tell us we have to be the same as others. For example, let's look at the education system. A common ableist narrative in education is that there are correct ways to speak, to read, and to have mobility. From a young age, educational institutions prioritize and value verbal language over sign language, reading print over braille or ebooks or audiobooks, creating environments for children who walk, but only meeting the very barest minimum requirements for children who roll. The point that is repeated for a child's entire educational experience is that disabled students are to copy non-disabled students. There is a prejudice against doing activities in a way that is more efficient or easier for people with disabilities, but is not how non-disabled people do it. These ableist assumptions create inequities and unfairness that disadvantage those with disabilities. Another example is a member who's in university for theater. This slide has a group of theater students talking in a circle. So our member says that theater is very focused on teamwork. If you slow down, you're slowing everyone down. She is expected to work for hours without a break and without a complaint, except she has diabetes. She needs breaks. She needs to check her insulin. She is shamed for this. She is told it is negatively impacting the team. She faces prejudice and discrimination because she is not forcing her body to meet the same schedule as others. How many other students are also not able to meet those demands but don't speak up because they don't want to highlight their lack of sameness? And how does this affect their participation? This can force disabled students to out themselves in an environment that has said since day 1 of kindergarten that their lack of sameness is a deficit. We all need to think about how we participate in keeping people in boxes that they may not fit. We can work to change, to recognize and celebrate people for who they are and what they have to offer. We need to understand that we are not the same, and that is okay. This slide includes a photograph of a moving walkway at an airport. I think this quote is an excellent visual of moving away from racism and can also be applied to ableism. Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum said, "I sometimes visualize the ongoing cycle of racism as a moving walkway at the airport. Active racist behavior is equivalent to walking fast on the conveyor belt. Passive racist behavior is equivalent to standing still on the walkway. No overt effort is being made, but the conveyor belt moves the bystanders along to the same destination as those who are actively walking. Some of the bystanders may feel the motion of the conveyor belt, see the active racist ahead of them, and choose to turn around. But unless they are walking actively in the opposite direction at a speed faster than the conveyor belt, unless they are actively anti-racist, they will find themselves carried along with the others. This applies to ableism as well. We all need to actively walk away from ableism." Disability justice. The term disability justice was created in 2005 from conversations between Black, Brown, queer, and trans people, including Patty Byrne, Mia Mingus, Stacey Milburn, Leroy Moore, Eli Clare, and Sebastian Margaret, in reaction to their exclusion from the mainstream disability movement and studies, and the focus on straight white males with physical disabilities. CAN's workshop covers the 10 principles of disability justice created by the organization Sins Invalid. We have multiple versions of this workshop. There's a 1-hour introduction to the 10 principles, a 2-hour version that is both disability awareness and disability justice, and a 2-hour workshop that includes how to apply a disability justice framework to one's work. This slide has a photograph of a conference room full of participants at one of CAN's disability justice workshops. As one participant said about our workshop, the intro to disability justice workshop held by Heather McCain was one of the most thought-provoking, in-depth, and necessary workshops I've ever taken. Heather grounded teachings on disability justice in the context of the systems of oppression created by colonialism and held firm solidarity with Indigenous, Black, and people of color. In addition to creating a welcoming and judgment-free space, Heather seemed to create the workshop with a care for themselves, their community, and all the participants involved. The workshop wasn't a box to check in allyship. The workshop was instead empowering in its transformative call to action. It left me feeling like I had the tools to ask questions, dig deeper, and do the work in my own life and organization to prioritize accessibility and inclusion in an intentional and meaningful way. And this was written by Jessica Johns, who was the managing editor of Room and the programming director for Growing Room Literary Festival. Part of my work at CAN is community building. I very much use the principles of disability justice and the wisdom from those who came before and coexist with me now. The systems have failed disabled and 2S LGBTQIA+ people, so we engage in care work with one another, including holding space, recognizing and sharing skills, and lifting one another up. It is a delicate balance, but it is so beautiful when it works. I facilitate Chronically Queer, a support group for 2S LGBTQIA+ people with chronic health conditions. Pictured on this slide is a group of 9 chronically queer members with different disabilities, races, ages, and sexualities. The photo was taken at a Vancouver Pride Parade. We are carrying signs that include, I am a lesbian, I have an invisible illness, I am proud, spoiler alert, disabled people can be queer too. My personal favorite, queer here and a pain in the ass for medical and gender systems everywhere. And one of our members is wearing a mutant and proud t-shirt. I do what I can to create a safer environment and invite people to be part of our active community. I create an environment where truth and vulnerability are valued, recognized, and appreciated. It is amazing work. I get to witness people undo the damaging teachings of suppressing themselves and their identities and create an environment where people can freely be their full selves, become who they hope to be, and help others reclaim their authenticity. We lay bare our raw selves, speak our truths, acknowledge our limits, and share our strengths. I have people who contact me after meetings to say that they feel lighter, that they now have a place where they belong, and that they haven't felt that safe in a very long time. This slide has a vertical line of red paper hearts. Within our networks of community care, we know that we can ask for what we need while still preserving our independence, integrity, and autonomy. We engage with each other and create and explore new ways of doing things and lessen our collective dependency on a system that has and continues to harm us and disregard our collective needs. Society is missing out by forcing so many of us to fit ourselves or stuff ourselves unnaturally into a box. Because I have been in rooms that are safer spaces where honesty flows and people are raw and real, and it is truly magical. And we are all losing out by not having more of these spaces. Without this community building, all too often marginalized people experience imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is feeling inadequate, feeling like you aren't qualified to do the work you are doing, or feeling like you might be discovered as a fraud. A person with imposter syndrome experiences self-doubt and often attributes their success to luck or people overestimating their abilities. People with imposter syndrome also tend to downplay, discount, or minimize their abilities and achievements. This slide has a row of illustrated people of different ages, races, disabilities, religions, and other varied demographics. Imposter syndrome is widespread, and one study found that 70% of respondents had experienced it at one point. It is something that many of us feel, whether we are a student, new to our field, or a highly accomplished person. There are ways to reduce the feelings of imposter syndrome and address the voices in our head that tell us to doubt ourselves and our work. Imposter syndrome comes from internalized messages that we don't always realize we are taking in. Imposter syndrome can also stem from being a person with multiple intersecting identities, particularly when those identities are pushed to the margins. In our workshop, we talk about how imposter syndrome is not just a personal problem, but one based on who gets to be in power and define success. Author Raina Gattuso said, "Let's get one thing straight. Imposter syndrome isn't just a personal problem. It's a historic result of who gets to be in power and define success based on categories like gender, race, sexuality, and ability." Take, for example, the parameters of what is or isn't considered good behavior and professionalism. Typically, these parameters are set by non-marginalized people who are trying to control others and gatekeep positions of power. Much of what is considered unprofessional or bad behavior is how disabled people need to be in spaces in order to be active participants. Ask who sets these rules and who is being left out, punished, or made to feel like an imposter. Challenge your thoughts and unlearn potential biases. Try to give people the benefit of doubt, as their behavior may not be intentionally disruptive, but rather their way to participate. So for example, someone may be fidgeting, maybe trying to concentrate. I am currently playing with a fidget toy that I have in my hand for all presentations. It helps me to concentrate. Someone using a computer may not be able to write notes, but can type them. Someone on their device may be trying to stay awake. I often play solitaire during meetings because I'm on a lot of meds and have to fight off sleep when sitting still and listening. My playing isn't disrespectful. It's actually me trying to keep my brain working so I can concentrate on what's being discussed. Someone with sunglasses may be dealing with a migraine but still want to attend. Someone walking or stretching a lot may be in pain, and someone participating online but with their camera off may be juggling other duties like working, children, looking after older relatives, household chores, etc. Author Lamott said, "Perfectionism is the voice of the oppressor. It's time we question and detangle the systems of oppression that force us into thinking perfectionism is expected of us. Perfectionism is a harmful coping mechanism that boxes us in and reinforces aspects of oppression. We need to break down perfectionism and the shame and fear that's attached to its expectations. We are allowed to be our imperfect selves, and we can share the responsibility of helping to lift the expectation of perfectionism from others as well." A personal example is that I have tattoos on my thumbs. One says L, one says R. It's for left and right. I get my left and right mixed up all the time. And you know what? My tattoos are just a signal to others that I don't have to be perfect. It's okay that I'm in my 40s and still mix my left and right up. We do not have to be perfect. I have spent a lot of time unlearning the expectation of perfectionism from myself and others, and it's been of great benefit to my mental health and with my relationships. I speak about my experience so that others can unlearn it as well. Perfectionism keeps people striving for an unsustainable level of work. Perfectionism tells us that we are not worthy until we have met a certain quality and amount of work, and this is false. We are all inherently worthy. We are allowed to make mistakes. It is okay if we don't know everything. We can be curious, learn, and grow. We can start a job and develop ourselves within it without expecting ourselves to know how to do everything independently. We do not all have to match unrealistic expectations, and we should not hold others to them either. This slide has a photograph of a microphone and podium with a blurred audience in the background. One way I am working to unlearn this is that due to medications and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, I am no longer able to memorize my presentations and can be quite conscious of having to read from a script. This is less the case when I'm doing these workshops from home than in person. However, it is still something I have to tell myself not to be ashamed of. At conferences, I would be made to feel less professional. The expectation that my actions meet others when I have a disability and access needs that others don't is part of the myth of perfection, and that there's a particular way to be professional. It is also an example of ableism. Ask yourself, have you ever felt like an imposter? How has this affected you? Our next workshop is gender and sexuality. This slide has a colorful illustration of a diverse group of people in front of a large rainbow flag. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are committed to creating safer spaces for people from marginalized identities, but we also want to create safer spaces for people just learning. While we cover each of the letters of the rainbow alphabet, 2S LGBTQIA, our main focus is on people and their stories. We aim to move away from having a hyper focus on the language. Language is constantly shifting, changing, expanding, being updated by new generations and new awareness and understanding. The language also often intimidates people who are new to or learning about gender and sexuality. What CAN wants to focus on is that our communities are more than language. We are people, your neighbors, your coworkers, your family, your friends. We are people who have shared histories, desires, connections, and love. This slide has a photo of a person who is in a ribbon skirt of many colors dancing on a grassy bank above a waterway. Colonization affected how we perceive gender. Individuals were severely punished for expressing any gender or gender expression outside of the accepted norm of two genders and two sexes. In the middle of the 20th century, there was a pushback against this. We are now relearning about cultures around the world that had, and some still have, genders that are outside the binary of male and female. Traditionally and for centuries, Indigenous two-spirit people have been a distinct alternative gender status. The term is individual to the person and what it means to them. There is no one definition. It is important that we recognize that one of the damaging parts of colonialization was that two-spirit people were singled out for attempted erasure, violence, and abuse. Traditions and practices were forced to go underground, and in some bands, it disappeared altogether. Fortunately, today, two-spirit people are reviving their roles and traditions. It is vital to acknowledge, honor, be open to, and learn from cultures around the world that have expanded definitions of what gender means. Many people new to gender and sexuality think that expanded gender terms and expression is recent, but it is not. We are now in a time when more people are being open to possibilities that our world, our identities do not fit into neatly constricted boxes, but rather that we are a broad and wonderful spectrum. This slide has a photograph of a swatch of paint cards with a spectrum of color. For example, the Incas worshipped a dual-gendered god whose attendants, the Quarormi, wore androgynous clothing and represented a third gender space. In the southern state of Oaxaca, Mexico, there are three genders, female, male, and Muxai. Muxai are a respected and important part of their community. The Hijra, India's transgender and non-binary individuals, have been around for thousands of years. Evidence of their existence can be found in Hindu holy texts. The Kama Sutra even included references to people with a third nature, which is interpreted as gender fluidity. This slide has a photograph of a Hijra person dancing in front of an audience. After advocates fought for years, in 2014, the Hijra were granted legal recognition with the official designation of third gender on official documents. Until I taught a course on gender and sexuality, I didn't know about the cultures and identities I just shared. Learning about people from marginalized identities or identities different to your own can sometimes feel intimidating. There are so many identities, perspectives, and experiences. It can be overwhelming, but it can also be amazing to learn how vast, varied, amazing histories, stories, and people we have. I encourage you to lean into curiosity and find the joy of learning. This slide has a photo of a smiling student. I often hear people ask, why do we need labels? We live in a world where many people feel isolated and as if they might be the only person to experience something. For example, I am asexual and aromantic, which means that I do not have sexual or romantic attractions. I've never been in a relationship. I've never had sex. I knew this to be true to myself, but I had no representation of other people until the term asexual was created. Suddenly, I found other people who shared similar experiences. I felt less alone. Labels matter to some people. They help people find their place in the world, find others, find support, better understand themselves and others. However, no one person is just one label. My being asexual and aromantic are just components of who I am. I should never be judged based solely on one identity, just as I don't want people judging me based solely on my being disabled. Labels can help us know ourselves and others, but we don't have to be hyper-focused on them. The real importance is accepting the person, whatever their experience is. And for some, their labels really matter, and it is important that those in their support system honor and respect that. Keep in mind that as people learn about their identities, they'll be learning about their own as well. Some people don't feel that they are required or necessary. Others can be fluid or flexible, unsure, uninterested, or overwhelmed. Some people discover and become comfortable with labels over many years. It is more of a long-term journey than a sudden realization. It is good to know the current language and labels are, but there should be no expectation that everyone has to use them. On this slide is a post by Butler Atwood, and it says, "I'm about to cry. My 60-year-old mother watched a Netflix documentary and only just now found out she's asexual. I've been trying to figure out how to bring up this idea to her for years. I am so glad to hear her. She's so happy and saying, there really is nothing wrong with me. I didn't realize it wore on her like that. God bless the internet." This slide shows an image of a turtle hiding in a shell. Its body is pride colors and its shell is dark gray. The text says, "It's okay if you're not ready yet. Never feel that you have to figure this all out now or that you have to disclose your identity before you're ready." I have heard people say that 2S LGBTQIA+ folks have too many labels. We actually all have similar amounts of labels. If you aren't homosexual, you're bisexual or pansexual or heterosexual or some other sexuality. If you aren't transgender, you're cisgender. If you're not intersex, you're perisex, meaning not intersex. This is true for other identities as well. If you're not disabled, you're non-disabled. If you aren't neurodivergent, you're neurotypical. If you aren't autistic, you are allistic. People often think one group has too many labels because they come from a place of privilege of never having had to describe or define their own labels. They have never had to worry about being misidentified because their identities are always centered in society. So as I said, I love learning about my identities and others because there's so many fascinating stories. We are more than language. For example, gay relationships have a long history. Some rights that have only recently been won already existed in history. Take men marrying men and having access to their partner's benefits when they die. So here is a TikTok video about Mateolage from TikTok creator at Rainbow History Class.
You'll have to play it with sound.
Yeah, hold on, we're gonna.
Well, if they wanted to make Pirates of the Caribbean more realistic, it would have been much gayer. Pirate ships and homosexuality actually have a long-standing relationship. I'll explain. Let's go back to the late 17th century, the golden age of piracy. Life on a pirate ship was nothing like society at the time. Pirates were an all-male crew, so to reduce tensions on board, men would enter same-sex relationships with each other. These relationships weren't a secret or merely tolerated, but encouraged and formalized in a kind of civil union called a matelotage. Matelots, which roughly translates to bunkmates, would do everything together, always embracing each other before going into combat, fighting side by side, and even toasting their lives together with seawater. Matelotage was also quite progressive, as if one matelot died, their possessions would automatically go to the other, rights that society has taken years to grant to our community. Pirate ships even had forms of insurance where buccaneers were given pieces of aid when they were injured in battle. So while life at sea wasn't easy, if you were a queer buccaneer, it was gold.
So there's so much to learn, and we welcome anybody who is curious about learning. Some clients had difficulties choosing between our workshops. Others asked for a sample before deciding which workshop to host. Our workshop, Breaking Barriers, offers solutions to both these needs by combining information from our disability awareness, gender and sexuality, and imposter syndrome workshops. The workshops cover how to make your environment more accessible and equitable, how to be aware of language, and how to support people from marginalized populations. This slide has an image of 4 friends on a boardwalk outside of a building. This slide has a photo of the pride flag being held high in front of a courthouse. In 2021, we launched 2 new workshops for Pride season, Queer and Trans History BC and Queer and Trans History Canada. These 2 workshops cover 70+ years of history in strides forward for queer and trans folk. Learn about people and organizations that fought for and secured the rights, freedoms, and protections we currently hold. And we also highlight some of the rights and protections we are still fighting for today. Out of our experience with COVID, we created our Crip Kindness workshop. Disabled people have developed ways of being together that recognize people's inherent worth and values what each individual has to offer. This slide has an image of 2 people looking at an iPad. This workshop is a discussion about how Crip kindness and community care can be transferred to everyday life. Discussion includes who sets the boundaries of good versus bad behavior and professionalism, and how to engage in community care to ensure people's inherent worth is recognized and celebrated. Every person deserves respect and dignity. Collective liberation is the 10th principle of disability justice. It means recognizing that all of our struggles are interconnected. We must work together to create the kind of world we all need. The final principle is also a call to action. Disability justice asks us to work together across the barriers that try to divide us and remind us that doing so strengthens all of us. Our power is in diverse identities and lived experience. They give us as a collective the tools we need to dismantle the systems of oppression and create a world in which all people are recognized and valued. This final principle ensures that no one is left behind or out of this movement. It is only by moving forward all together that we can accomplish the revolution that we need. You being here today is a step towards collective liberation. This slide includes the logo of my organization and our contact information. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you very much for being here today. Does anybody have any questions? Or is there something within the workshop that particularly resonated with you?
Hi, my name is Alex. I just wanted to thank you for giving the talk today. I thought some of the stuff you brought up on the queer history is really fascinating. So yeah, thanks for giving the talk.
Okay, thank you for being here, Alex. We're also in the works of creating disability history workshops as well, because as we do our disability awareness workshops, we realize that there's very little education about the people who have come before us, who fought within very horrible, damaging structures to have the rights and privileges that we have now. And I think it's really important as we look forward that we also look back, that we understand what came before us, who worked before us, and learn from the ways that they were able to move forward.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know I would definitely be interested in learning more about disabled history. I've read a couple books on the subject, and yeah, I'd love to learn more. Are those courses offered, or the classes, are they given online, or are they something you have to go to, or how is that information delivered?
Currently, because all our facilitators, including myself, are immunocompromised, they're online only. And we have both private and public. So we had to take a break for a bit because of health reasons this year, but in this fall, we're going to be doing them all online. And we will be posting them on our website when they're available.
Awesome. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, so we can end the workshop.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. It was really nice. See you guys. Bye.
Bye.